What's up, guys? It's Alec Torelli. Welcome back to an episode of the Hand of the Day.
Hand of the Day.
Today's hand comes from John, and you're going to have to excuse me because we got these blinds wrong in this cash game. We're playing, I believe, 80 cent, 160, or $1, $2. I don't think it's that important, though, because we open to $5 under the gun, and our opponent ends up defending in the big blind. So regardless of what the blinds are, we're up against a big blind defending hand range, and we're basically up against someone that defended in the big blind. We're with kings under the gun. That's what's important. We go heads up to the flop. The flop now comes ace, queen, 10. Our opponent checks, and we elect to bet $5, half pot continuation bet. Now here, I would probably go for a check in this spot, and one of the reasons why, and I think this is a useful tactic that you could apply to your own game, is to ask yourself a basic question. And that question is, can I profitably bet 3 streets? So can I bet the flop, bet the turn, and bet the river with my hand for value? If the answer is no, you're going to need to check 1 street at least. And a reasonable street to check, by default, there are no hard fast rules in poker, obviously, but a reasonable street to check is usually the flop. And the reason is because you play pot control on the flop, right? You don't get check raised off your hand and you don't inflate the pot, but you also have a strong hand in your checking range, right? You have a strong hand that you're going to check the flop with that can now either pick off a bluff on the turn, number one, or call a bet versus a worse hand on the turn if your opponent value bets something like queen jack, or you can now get value on the turn because your hand is a little bit more disguised because you checked the flop. So 3 pros for checking the flop here, and I think my kings would go into my flop checking range. I think I would check the flop with kings. That being said, betting the flop is, I think, still profitable. You're still likely to have the best hand, so for that reason I could see betting as a viable strategy. Anyway, we decide to bet half the pot. Our opponent now calls. Let's go to the turn. Turn comes a king of clubs. Our opponent checks, and I think most people are going to say the default play here is to check, and I would say you're right. We're going to want to check here because we don't want to get check raised, number one, and we also don't want to basically eliminate the possibility that our opponent calls with a worse hand. If we bet this turn with kings, it's difficult that our opponent is going to call with that many worse hands. He might call with 2 pair. He might call with like ace X with a club, maybe if he can have that. But there aren't that many worse hands that our opponent can call the turn here with, so we don't get that much value by betting. That said, some small percent of the time, right? I don't want to overstate this because it's a very small percent of the time. Something like 10, 15, 20% of the time, I would bet the turn here with kings just to merge my range and make myself more difficult to play against when the board pairs on the river. If we think about how we're going to play this hand on the turn, whenever we bet the turn, we're almost never going to have a boat when the board pairs on the river, because we're never betting the turn with 2 pair or a set. So some small percent of the time, I'm going to bet the turn here with a set or 2 pair, mainly a set, so that when the board pairs on the river, I actually can have a full house in my range, right? I'm going to make my range a little bit more disguised. It's going to be a very small percent. It's going to be against certain types of opponents that are never going to check raise, that are just going to call with all their hands. And it has to be the right circumstance. But I just wanted to throw that next level strategy content at you so that you could start to think about those sorts of things if the situation applies to you. That said, by far and away, don't leave 400 comments saying betting the turn is ridiculous. I understand it's a small percent of the time. That said, I'm going to probably check the turn here almost always, and we go heads up to the river. River comes an offsuit ace, and where we're thinking we're going to get value and we get excited, not too fast, because our opponent bets 6x the pot, basically putting us all in. 6x the pot. We pretty much never see that in live poker. We don't see it that much in online poker, and it's frustrating to see when we were going down this street of, oh my gosh, we have a great hand, we filled up, we're gonna get value, we're gonna win a lot of money, to now being, our back against the wall saying, can we even profitably call this river? The first thing that's important to do in a situation like this is to keep your head straight. Because it's so common that people are like, well, I don't know what to do. He's 6x the pot. Like, how do you put him on a range here? How do you know what he has? Like, what am I supposed to do? I got a call. I have a boat. And it's like, we can still use the same process for hand reading that we use in any other street against any other player in any other situation. And I talk more about this in my hand reading system that I put together. It's a free guide you could download at the link below if you want more information from me. Basically a step-by-step process that I use in every decision I make to help me make profitable decisions against opponents, even like this one, in tough spots like this. There is a system you can use, and I've made it free for you. Click the link below if you want more. But for now, let me walk you through my thought process, and here's what you need to know. First thing you want to do is put your opponent on a hand range. In other words, estimate what hands your opponent can have. You want to think about two things. You want to think about what hands you beat and what hands you don't beat. So first, let's say, what hands is my opponent betting on this river that beat me? I would say he can bet ace 10, ace queen, ace king is unlikely because we have two of the kings and because he didn't 3-bet pre-flop. Maybe he can have ace king. He can have ace jack of clubs and he could have jack 9 of clubs. He can maybe have pocket tens if we're being ambitious, but I would say that's pretty unlikely because he's probably not going to 6x the pot with tens on the river. It's almost too loose. I think he's going to go for a standard check raise or just a bet. Maybe he can have tens though. You could throw that in there. Queens he probably can't have because he would have 3-bet pre-flop. So those are the hands that he can have, that he's value betting. It's important to realize right away that every hand he's value betting, with the exception of tens or maybe queens, beat us. Every hand he's value betting beats us. That's not good. That means when you're calling this river, your opponent needs to be bluffing. So it's important to clarify what you're hoping for when you're calling this river with kings. You're not like, oh my God, I got him beat. He's value betting like 5-6 of clubs. That is not happening if you're playing against someone that lives in the real world. Nobody's value betting 5-6 of clubs here on this river. I think that would be ridiculous for a 6x pot bet. 6x the pot. Don't forget that. 6x the pot. So we are beating bluffs. Now you have to say to yourself, what hands is he bluffing? And am I getting the right price to call? Let's go in order. What hands can he reasonably bluff this river with? Well, he can bluff the river if he's playing at all adhering to game theory. If he's at all thinking about what hands should he be bluffing the river with, he could have ace X types of hands. Those hands make sense. He check calls the flop with ace X, like ace 5 of spades. And he now decides that he's going to turn that into a bluff because he has a blocker. And this is like the worst hand he can have type of thing. He needs bluffs in his range. He's going to bluff, or the whole game theory thing. That is possible. But you have to realize, even if he has ace 5 of spades, ace 4, ace 3, ace deuce, you are only going to win this pot something like 30% of the time. In other words, there aren't enough bluffs in his range for you to win the pot 45 or 50% of the time, which is how often you need to win to justify calling. Remember, he bet 6x the pot, so you're calling 120 to win 140, which means you need roughly 45% equity, or you need to win 45% of the time to justify calling. That means he needs to be bluffing or have a worse hand for value something like 40-45% of the time. That's not happening here in my estimation. It's happening less than that. At most, something like 30-35%. Now, one question I'm anticipating that I know I'm going to get asked in the comments is, can't he have the nut flush? Can't he have something like ace 5 of clubs? Now, the way I would answer this question is to put yourself in his shoes, right? What would you do if you had the nut flush? Are you really going to 6x the pot here when the board is paired with the nut flush? Like, what are you hoping to get called by if you have ace 5 of clubs? Your opponent can't have a jack high flush because he's not going to have jack 8 of clubs racing under the gun. Any jack high flush is going to be jack 9, which is a straight flush. So what is he hoping if you have ace-5 of clubs? That he gets called by 8-7 of clubs that like checked the turn? Like you're basically narrowing our range for calling down to full houses when you 6x the pot here. So it doesn't make sense to me that someone could have the nut flush here. It doesn't make sense to me. So I actually think that in this spot, as crazy as it sounds, we could get away with a fold. Now this is all predicated on our opponent being on the level that we're talking about here, you and I, in this video. Now, if your opponent is on Pluto, if your opponent doesn't know how to hand read, if your opponent's loose maniac, if your opponent's wasted out of his mind, if your opponent's tilted and steaming, you know, these things might not apply because his hand range might be wider and he might have more bluffs. But if he's at all reasonable, if he's a tight, solid winning player, if he's playing well, if he's solid, if he knows how to hand read, I don't think that we're going to win often enough, and I think we could actually fold. Now, you're probably like, well, Alec, I don't care what you think. I want to know what happened. And unfortunately, we end up folding. Well, not unfortunately. We end up folding, which I think is the correct play. Unfortunately, our opponent doesn't show, so I don't have results for you guys in this video. So I would love to hear your thoughts in a comment below. Let me know what you think. What would you have done? What do you think our opponent has? And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you'd like more from me, you like this style of analysis, you want that next level, I encourage you to download the free hand reading system at the link below. It'll really help you guys with this process, walking you through step by step how to put your opponents on a hand, figure out what your strategy should be, even in tough spots like this that you don't see that often. It's a system you could apply anywhere. So hope you guys like that. If you want more from me, like this video, subscribe to my channel, more awesome content coming your way. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time on the Hand of the Day. Cheers.